Hello and welcome to Feedback for the week of December 14th. We are near the end of the year. We are near, maybe when I get to take some time off, I'll find out soon. This is a very special episode because it is our Game of the Year episode, and we are joined by representatives of the Naughty Dog team who made Uncharted 2, which was our Game of the Year. If you haven't seen it, go watch G4. This thing is going to replay a lot, and you can look at all the other winners on G4TV.com. First, let's introduce someone who we all know and love, Abby Happy.
Hi.
And one of the first members from Naughty Dog, Amy Hennig.
Hello.
And, of course, the wonderful Sterling McGarvey.
I'm your hair substitute this week.
Yes, and you're doing it double time. and also rounding out, another representative from Naughty Dog, Bruce Straley.
Hey, guys.
All right, guys, obviously, congratulations, and thank you so much for taking the time after having made a game, having sold a game, and now celebrating the winnings of this game to actually come on the show with us. First, if you guys don't mind, I actually made a point of not introducing you by title because I think that your title is a little bit restrictive to what you actually did on the game. And so, Amy, if you don't mind, feel free to say what your title is, but what you actually also, how many more things you did to help make Uncharted 2.
I'm the creative director on the project, but titles at Naughty Dog are kind of amorphous and really...
They are here too. I'm not really talented. They just call me talent.
It's, we all collaborate on everything. So, I mean, my main focus, just because it's such a big game and so ambitious and we had so little time actually to make it, that my main focus was on story and writing and working with the actors and just kind of working on the gestalt of the game design and the story and the level progression with Bruce.
And I think it's worth pointing out, we also did give it Best Writing for 2009 as well,
Thank
so
you.
congratulations for that.
Thank you so much.
Bruce, what is your nebulous title and what is it not fully encompassing?
I am the game director of Uncharted 2, and I honestly don't know what I do. How do you describe what... I mean, Amy's right. There's no real... The hierarchy is pretty flat. You kind of do what you have to do. I guess I'm the rudder. Like, if we think of, like, everybody on this amazingly skilled, crafted, beautiful ship, trying to make it across the ocean, then I'm just the guy going, like, a little left, a little right, a little forward,
I'm
more
the
awesome,
figurehead
faster,
at the front of the ship.
Right. Like, no, steam ahead. He's like, no, me engines can't take it no more. Amy, you mentioned that you had so little time, and I think that people think about that 2-year development cycle, but then I think when you
really
play
2
the
years.
game and you see what's in it, and I'm thinking just in the single player alone, excluding even the co-op and the competitive multiplayer. How did you guys accomplish a game that does so many new things in such a short period of time?
We just worked our asses off, honestly. I mean, after the first one, we just put our heads down and we knew we wanted to do something even bigger and more ambitious. And I mean, we almost killed ourselves making it, so it was crazy. We really didn't have 2 years. It was more like 18 to 20 months. Yeah. I mean, and it was just a matter of everybody buckling down.
I mean, we just looked at, Drake's Fortune, what we created there. Okay, that's a good foundation. Now that's just a springboard. Where do we go from here? So, what are the things that we liked and didn't like? We actually sat down at the beginning of making this game and kind of created a rules list. We really kind of, dissected what was Drake's Fortune and go, okay, Uncharted universe is allowed to do this, Drake's allowed to do that, and then and then we kind of from there said, okay, this gives us a lot of flexibility to create this new summer blockbuster experience. We got the characters. How do we expand on that more within the game? And then, the action pieces. We had like maybe 2, 3, I think, in the first one where it's like the scaffolding collapse in the temple and the Jeep flipping over. And we looked at that. It's like, that's really cool. Like, let's do more of that. What does that mean technically? How do we have to expand our technical movesets and Drake's mechanics into what became the collapsing building and the train and the convoy and having Drake, all the moveset, all the guns, all the enemies, all the navigation, all that stuff be available on both global and local space. That was a very, very first technical undertaking. And then,
that and multiplayer,
Yeah. And it's like, that's, I guess, where we started.
One of the ways we're
Starting big, I'm assuming.
Okay, I guess that's the biggest answer is we're perfectionists, and we at Naughty Dog seem to have like a self-esteem problem that we need to do more to like compensate or something. Like
we never think we're doing enough. And
Yeah.
Thankfully, that's true across the board. We all work
weird.
like that. And I think the reason we can pull it off, unlike maybe some other developers, is that because we don't really have a hierarchy, we don't really have management, everybody's just free to get on with it. and there isn't a lot of. We don't really have meetings. We don't really have documentation. Everybody's.
I
just
like this
sort
business model.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, everybody's
No
shocked when we say
meetings.
we don't have any producers. When we don't have any producers in house, we have them up at Sony. But it just really liberates everybody just to do their best work, and they have the autonomy to do it.
Wow. Obviously, Abby, Sterling, jump in here at any time if you guys are being
I'm fascinated
inspired.
just listening to how it was created. I think what really stood out for me playing the game was the female characters. And, I mean, it sounds, obviously I'm a girl, so I pay attention to
Okay,
those sort of
as a
things
dude,
more.
the female
But
character
they were
stood out to me as
amazing.
well.
Yeah. And not in the way that sometimes female characters
No.
stand out in video games.
I don't know what
But-
you mean.
Yeah. No, it was just absolutely amazing to see such a mature take and have these two women that are both very strong but very different. And I just wanted to say how impressive that was. I don't know if I really have a question about that, except that I was floored to see how well that female characters could be written.
Oh, well, thanks. I mean, obviously, I think we come from a sort of a progressive standpoint, and, obviously I'm a woman. But, I mean, it's a huge credit to our actors. The fact that Claudia and Emily are so good, and they brought so much to those roles that I think a lot of it was on the page, and they'll give us credit for that. But the fact that, if we were going to do anything that would have been cliched or any at all sort of derogatory, that they wouldn't have let us get away with it,
Right.
And I think what people may not realize is how much of a collaborative relationship we have with the actors. We rewrite with them, we revise and table read and block all the scenes. So what we come up with on the page is completely changed by the time we've shot it with the actors because of their contribution.
Now, is that what allowed these characters they're iconic characters. You can see sort of how they fit, into that traditional type of narrative, but they're not stereotypes. They're not kind of sort of superficial representations of them. They actually, you see their role in the story, but then you see this other depth that helps, make it so much interesting. I mean, is that really because of just the contribution of the actors themselves, or did you guys kind of set out to do that in advance?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't want to discount the contribution of the actors at all because it's a huge component, and it's not just their contribution of their talents, but also how we've enabled them to work with us, which is, again, very unusual in the industry. Normally, the actors just go in, they're in the studio alone, they read their lines, they have no idea why it's relevant, what the context is, they're doing their best to act under those circumstances. We always have our actors acting together, and they have all that rehearsal time and are encouraged to improvise and ad-lib together. But I think the thing is we knew with our genre, we wanted the characters to have a basis in a stereotype because that's part of the sandbox we're playing in. That's part of the charm of this, that there's a retro throwback to it, but that we wanted to then confound all those stereotypes by having the characters have more surprises and depth and contradictions that you would normally find in a more sort of cardboard cutout presentation.
I think, it's just we tried to make real characters,
Right.
that have real delivery and real motivations, and they exist in that world just like Nathan Drake and everybody. I mean, we tried to make it as grounded as possible, not just we have cool ideas and we're going to make them do this and she's going to be hot. So hot. It's, we actually want to make an engaging story with characters that you want to follow, and that's the intriguing part, I think,
And are wearing clothing.
Yeah, and they have
Shock.
normal breast sizes and things
Yeah.
like that.
And when you're in Tibet and it's cold, dressing appropriately.
Yes.
Right.
I think that's worth pointing out.
Pretty appropriate.
These are actually things that we've discussed.
Yeah.
I mean, we look at it as like, okay, well, there's video games, and how do we own our own sort of slice and do something else with it besides kind of what you've grown to expect video games to bring, in characters and
even in your
female
kind of secondary and even tertiary characters. I mean, when you're in a village in Tibet and then you come back to it, and I had an idea of what I would come back to, but I was kind of crushed. Like, I came back and I'm like, oh, this is all my fault.
Exactly.
And I felt terrible. I really felt bad.
But
So
then,
thanks for making me feel bad. That was cool.
But then it's interesting because as you were saying that about the Tibetan village, I was thinking one of the great standout moments of the game for me was when the train level's done and you go back to the village and you have just a few minutes where you are Nathan Drake. You're not Nathan Drake shooting people. You're not adventurer. You're not explorer. You're just normal guy who just ended up in this weird place.
Yeah.
And I just love that moment where he's, he goes up to the cattle and he's kind of, he's talking to them, and he kicks the ball to the kids. And I felt like what I really love about the games is the way that the team has humanized them so much. It makes me feel like I can relate to them, even though I'm not some 27-year-old explorer who can just jump around in a bunch of dangerous caves.
He's in his mid-30s.
Oh, thank you, Amy. Thank you. Thank you. I was about to ask that myself, and I'm like, please say that my fantasy can be my fantasy, and I haven't outgrown it yet.
But, one thing I was curious about, I know a lot of the team came over from Crystal Dynamics, and you did as well. And I know you worked on the Legacy of Kain series. I'm kind of curious, like, what kind of strands of Legacy of Kain's DNA can we see in Uncharted? Or what's kind of the path and lessons that you learned in crafting those kinds of stories and bringing it over to this experience?
Well, I guess more process than anything else, because the two genres are so different from each other, right? Obviously that's kind of gothic melodrama and sort of deliberately, over the top and overwrought. That's kind of the point. Whereas obviously trying to do something that's a classic action adventure genre, you're playing in a whole different set of conventions. But from the process terms, even back then we always had the actors performing together. So all of those scenes and those dialogues, they were in the studio together, acting off of each other, because that's what acting is all about. And also we took the writing very seriously, and worked on revisions and things like that. So I think we've just always treated story as first,
Now, Bruce, back when I was out visiting you, when we were doing our special for X-Play, you had pointed out, I think, is one thing you wanted me to be sort of keen to when I was playing the game was the pacing, which I think is just, apparent from beginning to end. Now, how much of that pacing is driven by sort of the needs of the narrative, that sense that, okay, we've overstayed our welcome, or we really probably, we should linger here a little bit more because there's good things there. How much of that drives how long you sort of present an action set piece for? And not just like the big ones like the train and the convoy, but some of the nice ones that are sort of in the plaza in Nepal.
Well, it all starts with the story. We and Amy, myself, and two other guys, Neil and Josh, sat together in a room early on in the project and just kind of hammered out, the macro concept of the story and where we're going to go. And that story, at the exact same time that we're talking about sort of story beats and ideas that we want to do with characters, came out a lot of discussions about gameplay and, we could have this puzzle sequence here. And we started, there were a lot of discussions on what it meant to have exploration in a story and what it meant to have puzzling. And those kinds of things actually parallel different things that in a movie are like down-tempo times inside of a movie where a character needs time to digest the fight that they just got in with their girlfriend or whatever. So there's this, how do we use tried and true story techniques in gaming? And talking about story at the exact same time as gameplay, I think, is crucial to how Uncharted's pacing came about. And then in production, you just kind of feel it out. It's literally every designer and every company probably relates to the fact that we have more ideas than you can cram into the production cycle. So we try to not get too attached to those things and iterate and get people to play it as quickly as possible so we can feel like, okay, they're definitely here a little bit too long. We hear feedback from people like, yeah, that was pretty heavy or whatever. And we're like, okay, well, we can trim or just, kill a few enemies, take out, we have too many enemies here. So we want the pace to move at a clip so that you always feel like you're moving through the story and progressing somewhere new, whether it's a new environment or new story beat. And so if you keep somebody for too long, it's going to wear itself out really quickly. So it's really testing and iterating on that kind of feedback.
No, we do a ton of focus testing.
A
lot of internal testing that we just bring in students from USC and sit them down and have them play the game for 2 or 3 days, and we watch them, and we get metrics out of the game to see where they were stuck, how long they were stuck, where did they get frustrated, what was their body language, and then we keep tuning and then retesting.
Okay, I've got to ask you about that because especially when you think of sort of the famous stories from the 80s with the original ending of Fatal Attraction and how they put that in front of a test audience, and so they killed the original ending, which is now regarded to be far superior to the sort of the Boo Shock. And so then you sort of look at the idea of focus testing in video games, and I realize sort of the value of that, but it does seem to sort of run contrary to that sense of art or that pure essence of expression. Is that ever a conflict in your guys' head that you don't want to give that much power to these individuals?
Well, I think if we weren't running the focus test, we might feel that way. But the fact is that, it's Naughty Dog calling these people in and setting it up, and we do what we want with the data. There's no sense of any sort of corporate overlords telling us, okay, we got this feedback back on the feedback cards, and now you're going to have to do something about it. It's purely us going, well, that's interesting that they didn't respond to that, and then trying to analyze why they didn't, and then make an educated decision based on our experience and what to do about it.
Yeah, we're lucky enough at Naughty Dog to be surrounded by such skilled people, and we have such little hierarchy that we don't get bogged down in these, go up the chain to find out what this, executive thinks before we can make the change. We just change on the fly. We get a couple people together and go, this would be better if we, make this change here. For example, Focus Test actually gave us you ended up in the Tibetan village, and the contrast between it's Nathan Drake's low point, and then you want to go into this Tibetan village where the colors are saturated and you have a little bit of downtime. You're sort of like figuring out what's going on again, and everybody would run around and try and punch old ladies and cows and things. And we're like, all right, that's not exactly the effect we want. So out of seeing people using, that was the first thing that people started doing. Then there were conversations amongst the designers, and Richard came back with this idea of okay, well, what if when they tried to melee, that they actually reaches out and shake a hand, or pats somebody on the back, and that interaction only came out of watching somebody's experience.
It speaks more to the people playing it than the.
It does a little bit, but then if and it's a weird thing. How, I guess, as in character terms, how much of that sort of agency do you want to remove from the player's hands, and how much backs up the character? So. Well, we gave them the ability to punch still, rather than completely removing it, and we gave you the reward of giving you something surprising, oh, cool. I don't know how much feedback, how much positive response we get to people oh my God, I can go up to the cow and pet it on his head. That's so awesome.
The thing. From all of that, when we were playing through, I know that I ended up going up to everybody in the village, and especially every cow, because that just delighted me for some reason. So it's amazing to see how that feedback kind of, is something that I wouldn't have even thought about, necessarily trying to punch a cow, I swear.
No.
And it turned into something really positive.
This isn't Darkest of Days or anything like that.
I was thinking it's a bit of
TV.
It's a bit of give and take away. It's like you take away the ability for people to be a jerk in the village, and you give it right back to them in multiplayer.
That's a very good point. I mean, did you see a conditioning effect on those players that when you took away that kind of anarchic, non-Nathan Drake behavior, that it had some sort of effect upon them, as they played later on into the game? I guess you never really could have that opportunity to be like, oh no, I won't kill all you bad guys that are trying to kill me. You pretty much have to.
Yeah, but, unfortunately, yeah.
Did you see any change in how the players played? Once you added in that element.
No, I mean, I think we're
not
just
after that point.
We just want to deliver a good experience. It's just entertainment, so we're not trying to, change video games as a whole. We just want to create something that's really fun. So we're not, that moment hopefully paralleled the story in Nathan Drake's character arc, and that was the purpose of the village. And to get the juxtaposition between the first time you get in there and then coming back, seeing that contrast was really important to us. So we need to spend enough time to make you feel oh, I like these people, or I like this place, or I'm really familiar with this, so that when you come back, you get that oh my God, what's happened to these people? I love these, and that feeling hopefully comes up. And it's more about getting that emotion or that feeling rather than it is trying to create a change in the psychology of the players.
It's more to make sure it's in line with where we think they should be feeling narratively.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of paralleling the narrative, exactly.
Whenever we get into situations where there is this sort of cognitive dissonance break between, how we're trying to portray the characters and then, how maybe they can come off in the gameplay, we do our best to try to, mitigate some of that. It's tough, But I think a lot of this also comes out of how iterative our process is. Now, it's true of all game development, right? You have to iterate. Some companies, I don't think, do it as much as we do, and maybe that's why their products aren't quite as polished. But the fact is that we build a level. We don't plan some of this stuff in. We focus test. You go, oh, that's what people want to do. That's interesting. And then I'll actually take all that gameplay footage into the studio, into the voice studio, and have the actors just ADR to it. They just chase it. And so all those funny little comments, it's just them sitting in the studio together, riffing and ad-libbing, and or else I'll say, okay, well, I know we're going to be petting yaks, and we're going to be shaking the hands of villagers. I guess I need to hire a whole bunch of Tibetans. Great, and then I'll bring those people in, and then we have written lines. But it's all based on this sort of iterative testing of realizing what the game needs to reward the player for their exploration.
It's the same thing with the game design. The overall macro, again, is created off of a story, game, conversation. We want to tell the story. and have these characters go through this world and this experience, and so we don't do a whole lot of hardcore documentation of things. It's more like we get the basic outline, and then within that we sit down with individual designers and okay, this is where Nathan's at in the story, this is what kind of environment we need to do, you're heading here, like we need to see the temples actually in the environment, because we're saying in the story that 700 years ago when Marco Polo was here, it was just a valley of temples, so it needs to still have that embedded in the background. That's a requirement for the background artist, and it's more like you could spend time writing all that stuff down, but you were just wasting production time at that point. Like, just get to it, people. Like, and we are lucky that we work with such skilled people that we can sit down with them and we know with confidence that they're going to follow through. And yeah, it's a luxury. It's
funny you mentioned the lines and what's kind of ad-libbed, because there's one point where you climbed to the highest part of the city, and I was kind of walking around up there looking for where I was going next, and somebody walked up behind me and was like, well, did you go in the pool? And then, of course, you hop in the pool, and there's another, line that's had in it. It's just that kind of detail.
That's when you go in there and you go, Marco.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there's just no one else there to respond.
Right. Well, no, Chloe's there, and she goes, oh, really? You know?
That's right. That's right.
And that's Claudia and Nolan sitting side by side in the recording studio watching the footage, because we take the gameplay. Everybody's going to jump in that pool. We know it. It's just human nature.
And you have to.
They just did that whole exchange, and the fish out of water, all the way to the fish out of water when he jumps back.
We didn't design a pool at the top of the hotel. That was a background artist.
Just put one in.
Crazy, and he just decided, I'm going to make this the most awesome hotel and background, etc.
It was because it had like the bar up
and
there.
He created the pool.
It gets hot in Nepal, I think.
It makes sense. Hotel Shangri-La, and he's a pool at the top. It's
that's funny.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. It's a really nice thing that we have going on at Naughty Dog.
Now I want to know all the other little parts that weren't originally there. That just, I'm sure. Yeah. Any other really notable ones or?
Notable ones. Gosh. I'm sure it'll come up in conversation.
I know. You have to pull it out like that. Yeah.
Actually, what I'm curious about, I'd like to know, Bruce, what do you feel like is your favorite set piece in the game? And then Amy, I guess, what's your favorite moment, dramatic moment, whether it's an action set piece or just dialogue?
Yeah.
Just because it's a throwback to old school gaming, it really reminds me of when I first started playing games. It's the collapsing bridge in Shangri-La. Mm-hmm. That one is kind of there's something about that's just kind of twitch and simple, and yet all of Shangri-La is collapsing around me. And this is, sorry, spoilers, you should have already played the game, but
especially if you're watching this episode of Feedback.
Yeah,
and that sequence was familiar. It's like, of course, that's what happens. And forgive me if I don't remember. I don't have a very good memory. I guess it does happen when you're in a tunnel. You start to see the wall coming down. But I don't think I've ever been in an outdoor setting, and all of a sudden you really do feel that the environment is kind of crumbling all around you, and brings with it that sense of threat. It was. I don't even know what movie I'm thinking of, but I know I've seen at least 20 of them.
It's a classic ending. I mean, when we started off to do this series, we actually watched a ton of movies, going back to, the 30s and
like Errol Flynn
even
and
the Silence, Captain Blood and Thief of Baghdad, and all the way up through present day, and actually analyzed and broke down all the elements in the movies to see which ones occurred over and over again. And there's certain tropes that are just part of this genre, and I think you have to put them in if you're going to play in the sandbox again. The question is how do you do it in a way that's surprising and feels contemporary, right?
I mean, yeah,
but that idea of escaping from the collapsing place at the end of the story is classic.
You kind of do the jungle level and the ice level, but at the same time, they're in a way that I've never seen them presented before.
Actually, grounded in the world or the adventure.
Right.
Yeah, brain stopped.
I can answer his question. So, probably my favorite emotional moment, or my favorite scene in the game, was the one with the what we call the Elena reunion scene in the middle of the Nepal war zone. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because it's ironic. It was probably our hardest shooting day. It was one we were just all face palming, oh my God, this is just not working, and this is never going to come together. And it took us all morning to shoot just barely nothing, and then it all just sort of started rolling, and it turned out to be one of the best scenes in the game. And it's just the way the actors delivered the dialogue and the interplay between them, and the way the scene kept shifting up. It's just it's one of my favorite moments.
Now, one thing that I found very, very daring is that there was no spoon feeding to someone who had not played the original Uncharted as to who the character was. And of course, I played the original Uncharted, so I was just very curious. Did you focus test on people that had no prior experience with Drake's Fortune?
Yeah, we did both. I think new players and old players. We didn't even focus on that much.
No.
I think we just figured we knew that we wanted it to be accessible to people who hadn't played the first game.
It's kind of more interesting anyway, not knowing who
Yeah.
Elena is, and you know that there's some sort of history or some sort of past there, and to the like watching a movie, it's going to be more intriguing to try and figure out like who this. Obviously, by their banter, they have a relationship.
Yes.
So it's sort of more interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe if you haven't played Drake's Fortune, I don't know.
And
but
that's intentional. I mean,
unfortunately, I've played Drake's Fortune.
maybe to a fault, but we like to do more things by implication than by straight out exposition.
And you know what? As I think about it, in Raiders, when Indiana Jones goes to the bar, I don't think at that point you know that he had a fairly inappropriate relationship with one of his students at that point. It's just sort of as
get it,
yeah, you slowly realize they don't like each other, but not in that I just don't like you kind of
Right.
way.
Yeah.
It's like I know not to like you.
and I think the viewer and the player in our case, because we have to even think about more so the fact that we're an interactive medium, I think you engage them more if you're letting them fill in the blanks. I mean, I think that's why people find games like Eco and Shadow of the Colossus so compelling from a story point of view, is because, it's so much open to interpretation.
That's one thing we were talking about last week.
I
on
know.
the-
I know. This just seems to tie in where a lot of our interests are. Is that not just assuming you have to give everything to the player. And I think this brings to me to like. In trying to explain to some people that are not hardcore gamers where the accomplishments of Uncharted 2 are, it strikes me that it's in these very small details that you have to be of a very, very sharp eye or had interviewed you guys before to actually pick up on. But the overall effect is of something that's so much more polished. And I hate to use it. The only word I can think of is mature, because you're assuming that somehow that the player is going to be picking up on that. And I guess what I would like to focus on in that is the train sequence. We've played train sequences in games before, but nothing on the level of what's in Uncharted 2. And Bruce, I would say there's some stuff I've been taught about what's happening with the camera and how you're having far more real physics and people moving on that physics. But if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving sort of a summary of what have you accomplished in that sequence that is not in a train sequence that one is accustomed to in a video game?
Well, the train moves.
Yeah.
That's the big thing. That's honestly it was a big debate inside of Naughty Dog to go like, okay, we knew we wanted a train sequence because it was kind of like, that was definitely one of those tropes that you saw over and over again. That was definitely had to be in Uncharted 2 train. And when we did, another thing we did early on is a lot of brainstorming internally in Naughty Dog. And that came up in every single brainstorm session was like train. So we like, okay, train's in Uncharted 2, how do we do it? And that created a huge discussion on like, well, do we do standard video game where it's a scrolling background and a static, environment that you're walking on, or do we actually like attempt to do the impossible, which is create Nathan and all the tech and everything on local space separated from global space. So if I jump off, I'm on solid ground. If I jump on, I move with the train. That means everything has to be. And that was a huge debate because technically that's a huge undertaking.
I mean, it was the first level we started and the last one we finished.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was a huge undertaking. So,
It's what was the most challenging element? I mean, was it trying to allow you to move on top of the train when the train is moving below, or is it being able to go inside and out of the train, not just from where it breaks, but between cars, but through the windows?
We had to rewrite basically our entire engine. I mean, all the major routines of the engine to work on moving objects. Because in the first game, we faked a few things, but everything was based on being on static terrain. So if you think about it, I mean, all the AI, all the pathfinding, all the physics, all the object placement, I mean, everything, as well as all of Drake's mechanics, all had to work on moving objects. We tried to take advantage of it as much as we could, which is thus the collapsing bridge and sliding platforms and
yeah, we
collapsing
knew we were
buildings
going to
and
reuse this and get the bang
trucks.
for the buck out of it. That's
Yeah.
for sure. Our internal tools had to change. The thing that we actually lay things out on in the environment, that had to be upgraded. There was just this domino effect that,
The programmers just had to rewrite just about everything. I mean,
It
particle
almost sounds
system,
like
I mean,
if you hadn't decided to do that at the very beginning of development, it may not have made it into the game. Just because
There was a risk.
it had such a
Yeah.
cascading effect upon so many other elements of the development process.
I mean, we would have pulled the trigger at some point, but yeah, there was a risk that it wasn't going to work. Yeah.
And it's a give and take because the other thing that we missed out on, possibly, I mean, if you call it missing, but the thing that we exploited out of it is removing the vehicle sequences from Drake's Fortune, the Jeep and the jet ski, etc. in lieu of getting Drake's core mechanics, and that was important for us, is to make you feel, okay, I've learned these core mechanics. I want to keep those core mechanics, and now I can do them on moving objects, the train, the convoy, the collapsing bridge, the et cetera. That, it was kind of like, well, this was part of the debate of like, well, we can really exploit this once we get it in there. So let's do that and spend our programming time getting this core thing that we can really, use, rather than we're going to spend time just getting like one Jeep sequence or one jet ski or one,
My final question about the train sequence, because I think it's the one that, because it goes on for so long, you may not fully appreciate. Though I think most people went, wow, that you start in one terrain, you go into the tunnel, and then you come out on this absolutely awe-inspiring Himalayan vista. Mm-hmm. Had you guys intended to do that just for that sheer like pow effect?
Well, we knew we needed to try to transport the player from, the lowlands up to the mountains.
Well, some people do it with a load screen or a cutscene. You guys decided not to do that. I mean, and once again, I think that's what I'm getting at. That subtle decision to me, it had such a profound effect on how I think I got so absorbed into the game that, like, I did it. I mean, it was, I don't know. It was really something remarkable.
That's always something we try to maintain. It's tough. I mean, you'll notice in the game we used wipes in some places to say, and then meanwile back at the ranch, or it takes.
You actually used the Lucas wipe.
Yeah,
I mean, I love that.
Homage there. But I mean, we've always said that we try to maintain a kind of almost like Die Hard style pacing. That once we've put the player and the hero into a dilemma and a crisis, we want to just see how it plays out and not have moments of real rest, that it's all happening in real time. That's a little tough to do when you're globetrotting, but you can see that was why the train needed to be the way it was, because that was a point in the Nepal war zone when everything had tipped, when everything had kind of gone to hell, and I mean, I don't want to give too much away, I suppose.
I think
but
we've already spoiled.
Bruce already did that earlier. I'll be putting up the warning on that.
So, I mean, when, all of your alliances fall apart and you're basically trying to escape from the bad guys, and we wanted from that moment on for things to really play out as much in real time from there on out as we could. Obviously, there was a few places where, I think early on I remember we were going to even have like snowmobile levels that were going to take you from one place to another in the snow. We're like, oh, really? That's just not going to be fun. Let's just kill that now, And a wipe certainly
let Infinity Ward do that one.
Yeah, exactly. Well, after the semi-success of the jet ski in the last game, we thought, really, I don't know. Let's not worry about that, and we put wipes in instead. But it was still that sense of seeing the degradation in the hero, seeing him more beat up, and all of that. That's so important to telling this kind of story.
Yeah, at that point where he needed convincing to keep going on, I kind of felt like I would have at that point. It's like, oh, really? No.
So Sterling, I can see you chomping at the bit over there. So please,
I'm already thinking. I've got so many questions. I'm on the time limit.
You have this wonderful thought face. I'm like, what have I done wrong? He's angry. No, he's developing a good question.
Pensive. No, one of the things that I was thinking about that I've noticed between both games is that there's very much a swerve. Again, at this point, spoilers be damned. I hope everybody's beaten it who's watching.
What are you defining as swerve?
Because I feel like in the first game, as you were going, the idea was that you were chasing Sir Francis Drake's fortune, and you realize that the fortune is very much cursed.
Yeah.
And the idea here was that you're chasing the Chintamani stone, and what you come across, the Chintamani stone, is literally the tip of a more vast iceberg, so to speak. I mean, do you feel like that's a trope that you came across, an archetype in a lot of the films you were watching? And is it like a very deliberate thing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely deliberate. I mean, it comes from a couple places. I think, well, one, it's just good storytelling if you pull it off, which is you never want the player to be able to predict where you're going and then have it play out that way. I mean, that's just boring. You want to completely surprise them. I mean, and that goes from every level to level layout where, you jump on a platform and it collapses underfoot. That's that same sort of break between expectation and result that you want across your entire story. But it's also coming out of our the legacy, which is particularly like the Doc Savage stories from the old pulps, is that it was always that sort of Scooby-Doo mystery of okay, well, something strange seems to be going on here, but it isn't until you start getting to the story and you start picking up clues where you realize what's really happening that's not evident on the surface.
Is it a guy in a suit or a projection?
Right.
I think I'm just envious that I wasn't there for that initial process, because I can't think of all the movies I really wish I could have said, oh, this is for work, and just sit down and watch The Thief of Baghdad, and just all these wonderful classic movies. In terms of just, I think, archetypes, when we're looking at the action sequences, and not so much what you're doing, you're on a train or somewhere else, I think one of the other things that stood out to me is that, and it really only hit me in the second playthrough, that a lot of those environments are so much more dynamic than the player would necessarily think they are. Yeah. And like someone's like, oh, hold on, I'm going to run behind me, I'm going to go over there. That it did give me the sense that I was also constructing my action movie narrative in the smaller action sequences. I mean, how did you lay out those kind of, I guess, battlegrounds, for lack of a better word, to make sure you didn't give the player too much choice that they become sort of confused, but you gave them that real sense of variety, that they really have ownership over being an action hero?
We, again, looked at Drake's Fortune and said, like, okay, well, what's working, what's not? We saw a lot of people respond to, those gunplay arenas as, almost problem-solving, puzzles in a way, that they get in there and because we give so much freedom, what we like to call wide linear layout is, you can go left, you can go right, and our AI is smart enough to try to flank you around or and move in that space intelligently, that, we want to give you enough freedom to have fun and as a player feel like, okay, I want to try this and see what happens. And we got a lot of really great feedback from people that would try that and were surprised all the time and found that they could replay it again and again and try a new tactic. And the other thing we looked at was, Nathan Drake had this climbing and traversal and all this kind of stuff from the first game, but our layouts were very separated, but between, okay, I have to traverse up to the combat space and drop into it, and now I'm in here until it plays out and then move on. And that's something that we also wanted to play with, was blurring that line more and saying, well, what happens if Nathan Drake can shoot while he's jumping around, while he's on a sign and somebody comes out under him? Well, the player has the choice that if they want to try it, why not? Now I have a vertical piece of cover rather than ground cover, but it's the exact same concept. So it just kind of like, the ideas are something that we as players enjoy. You get to kind of play around with where can I push Nathan Drake and where can I nudge him and sort of find interesting tactics that are kind of that emergent gameplay that we all love about video. That's the cool thing about being an interactive medium. And of course, all of it's motivated by the fact that the story, like Lazarevich's men are in the war zone because they're looking for the same temple that they don't know that, they don't have the Purbedagger clue to know where. So they're in there and they have to look like they're milling about, possibly tearing down a temple, etc. This feeds into what kind of gameplay you're going to get. Do they know I'm there? Do they not know I'm there? Are they already on lookout for me because there was some report? Did they send in the helicopter, etc.? So where we are in the story is going to completely motivate what type of combat space we're gonna create, what kind of enemy AI we're going to put there.
I think we're running a little bit out of time, but I want to allow for last questions out of the two of you. Sterling, do you want to go first?
Oh boy, I've got a couple of them. But
Justify the hair.
Let me narrow it down.
I'll just ask one of them and then you get two. I don't know.
Okay, we go for the 2 for 1. Okay, I'll do it that way. Okay, so Bruce, as you were talking about the idea of this linearity and openness, I'm also curious how much of the design was done both with single-player vast exploration in mind, and how much of it was designed as giant multiplayer jungle gym?
It's interesting, when we got multiplayer up and running, which was really quick, we noticed instantly that it sucks to get shot in the ass when you're climbing up something. So it's funny that once you get that working, and you're fighting against the most intelligent AI, right, humans. Then it really started lending itself to like we had to speed up the animations, what kind of environments, what kind of flanking and stuff that the openness of the environment had to have. And we kind of tried to parallel, multiplayer and single player to a degree until it would break single player to the point that I think that people got confused about pathing or something like that, because in multiplayer it is an arena and you do have a specific goal, like trying to kill count, etc. Is that?
No, that was quite satisfying. I was just thinking about getting shot in the ass. Oh, also to your point, human intelligence is just I. It's not that.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that.
And Amy, my very loaded question: what are you reading right now?
Actually, I'm not reading anything for fun right now. I'm mostly doing research. I'm blanking on the names of the books that I've been looking at because there's been a few of them, all based on biographies of old explorers and
Lost City of Z.
Yeah, Lost City of Z is a good one. And the other one I can't remember. It's a compilation of a whole bunch of different explorers. It's just kind of in the research phase. I can't give anything away because there's nothing to give away, But
It's also, those also sound like good books to read. I would also point out.
yeah, well, exactly. I mean, they are very enjoyable. I shouldn't say it's homework, but it's just trying to immerse myself in even more in the genre and the history.
There's such a great sense of history, and I was going to ask you what was the coolest thing that you learned while you were doing research for the game?
Well, when we stumbled across this stuff with Marco Polo, I mean, it was really just. It seemed purpose-built for what we were looking for. I mean, thank God there had been a brand new biography of him that had just come out by Lawrence. I think it's Lawrence Bergren, right? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Most people have heard the name, but they really don't know much about Marco Polo as an explorer, and the fact that he, spent most of his life in China and as an emissary of Kublai Khan's, and then that there was this mystery surrounding his voyage home was just, I mean, I think we all went bingo, and so that was probably the coolest thing. And then for me personally, I mean, there's always so much learning and research that goes into it. I mean, not that I'm remembering any of it now, but I had to sort of essentially learn some Nepali, some Tibetan, and a little bit of Serbian, and work with Tibetan-speaking actors and things like that. And it's always cool to have a reason to learn something like that, especially this late in life.
See, there's learning in video games,
There is.
and then there's, you play Assassin's Creed 2, and clearly a lot of people had to, brush up on all of their odd politics of Renaissance Italy.
No, there's a whole other story going on if you speak Tibetan. So
I wondered about it.
Well, hopefully, unlike Eco, don't release the one with the subtitle, so it'll just always stay a mystery for me.
it's mostly just Tenzin making fun of Drake and questioning his sanity with the guys in the village. It's like, when they're standing there talking, they're like, "You think he hit his head? I don't know. He seems kind of stupid."
I went for subtitles as soon as I had them. Like, what am I missing off? He's making fun of me, isn't he?
Yes, the answer is yes. When he walks away from you before the ice cave, he's just basically saying, "Useless idiot."
Well, that was when I came back to the village. I thought everyone was going, "It's all your fault." So,
They're mostly just saying, "Look out and duck."
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It wasn't all about
Which
you.
is good advice in that sequence. So, guys, I wish I could actually somehow hold on to you for hours and hours on end, because this has been nothing short of fascinating, and I think for a game that all three of us here had such a pleasure playing, that there are still more lingering questions. So I'm probably going to find a way to just drive down the street and grab you and pull you back here, and that's more than. But once again, congratulations!
Oh,
You
thank you
really
so much.
just on a personal note, you really created a game that really is one. Ever so often, there's that game that reaffirms why I still enjoy doing this job.
Yeah.
And then with all the headaches and all those difficulties,
That
and
means a lot.
yeah, in my underwear on that Saturday morning doing my review, I was like, yes, this is why I enjoy it so much. So Bruce, Amy, thank you so much for stopping by. Obviously,
you.
Abby, Sterling, thanks for coming on down and doing this. This has been Feedback for the week of the 15th. We will be back next week, even though you might think we might be on holiday, because we sacrifice for your entertainment goodness. So make a point of watching that, and always submit questions that you'd like to have answered on the air by going to g4tv.com. And while you're there, you can also check out all the other winners, which includes Uncharted 2 and several other categories of our 2009 Game of the Year. See you next week.